Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
Both the Senate and governor races in Ohio have gotten closer since Emerson last polled them in August. So I want to start with the governor's race. Democrat Amy Acton is seeing her support go up, while Republican Vivek Ramaswamy is seeing his support go down. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, Brittany, this is a bit of a startling result, I think. Ohio, we tend to see as a really solid Republican state. That's definitely true at the presidential level. It has been in 2024, it was in 2020. And here we see that this is a competitive race. So Amy Acton, 46%, Ramaswamy, 45%. So this is effectively a tied race, a dead heat. We've got 9% undecided, though. So that's still a relatively large number. So there's still some room here for maneuvering among the candidates.
And so I guess my next question to you, 9% undecided, they're neck and neck, they're 1% apart. How much does that undecided play a factor here, especially because, as you said, this is a neck and neck race?
It will definitely play a factor here. So if we look at the demographics a little bit and some shifts since we last tested this, we see that women are now breaking for Acton. That is a shift since August when they were split. Men are still supporting Ramaswamy, however, by about 20 points. Acton also wins independents here by about 5 points. And what we actually found, which is a little bit surprising, is that middle-aged voters are actually more likely to be undecided in this race than some of the younger groups, which we usually see here. So I think that those voters, especially those middle-aged undecided voters, they are very much up for grabs, and they will be very important to the campaigns. There's a lot to be said there. These are more likely to be higher propensity voters. They're more likely to turn out, but they haven't made up their minds yet. So both candidates are going to have to speak to them. Again, a little bit surprising to see that result. And there are quite a number of them here with 9%.
And now I want to move on to the Senate race. That has a little more wiggle room for the Republican Senator John Husted. Not much, but just a little bit more. Why is that? Why are more Republicans supporting him than Ramaswamy?
So I do think that there is an incumbency advantage here, Husted being the incumbent senator with 49%, Brown, the challenger, at 46%, and relatively fewer, 5% undecided here. I think that there's a little bit more in play here with the incumbency advantage, also the name recognition. So Husted is relatively well known, as is Brown, though. So, I think that both candidates are going to run up against a little bit of a wall here in terms of trying to convince the electorate that, that who they are and that they aren't necessarily tied to who they have been in the past. So in other words, these undecided voters, they by and large already know these guys. And so the campaigns are going to have their work cut out for them in telling them why they are the best choice for Ohio going forward, how they're either going to work with or against the Trump administration. There's a lot at play there, and it's going to be tough for those campaigns to really break out of the mold that they've already set for themselves.
And to that point, Husted served as the state's lieutenant governor. Sherrod Brown, he was the former senator of Ohio. He lost that seat, though, in 2024 to now Senator Bernie Moreno. Does this poll suggest that there's a large appetite for Sherrod Brown to return back to politics and go back to the Senate?
And I don't know that there is that evidence here. However, I will say, in 2024, a Republican wave across the country, Brown only lost that seat by about 3.5 points. Right now, he is hot on Husted's tail at about 3 points. So this is certainly not outside of a winnable race for Brown. I think if we see a Democratic wave like we did in, say, 2018, and as we've sort of seen in 2025 already, then I think this is very much up for grabs. And, Brown stands a reasonable shot, again, especially given that 2024 result when the rest of Ohio voted for Republicans overwhelmingly. We didn't necessarily see that in the Senate race. And so, we might see that again. And, I think that 3.5 points, that's a small deficit that he can overcome pretty quickly.
And what's the temperature when it comes to how Ohioans feel about the incumbent governor, Mike DeWine? He's a Republican, as well as President Donald Trump. Are they feeling good about them, bad about them? And do you think that that's going to impact this race at all? Either race, the Senate race or the governor's race?
Yeah, I think it's going to impact both races. But starting with Trump, I think we can say that he gets sort of middling reviews here. So his approval rating is 46% approve, 48% disapprove. That's not the number that I would want to see if I'm either Donald Trump or a Republican running in 2026. Obviously, he is the leader of the party. Nobody disputes that. And he is going to drag down other Republicans as long as he maintains a negative approval rating. And that's especially true, again, in states like Ohio, which have been Republican strongholds for many years. Then we look at Governor DeWine, and his approval number is pretty shockingly bad. 26% approve versus 45% disapprove. Again, I don't have a great explanation for why this is the case, but his approval rating is very poor. And I think that what we probably do see is some consolidation among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents who are ready to disapprove and vote against any Republican they see on the ballot. Whereas earning that approval is more of an uphill battle. You're going to earn the approval and votes of diehard Republicans, but it's everybody else you have to convince. And I think we're really seeing the effects of that in Ohio in this poll.
And to that point, Matt, I mean, I don't think in all of our conversations that we've had over the past over a year, I've never seen an approval rating that bad. And it's not like Governor DeWine is that much of a lightning rod figure. But do you think that this all means that Ohio, which, as you said, was a strong foothold for Republicans, is this getting less solidly red?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's getting less solidly red. I think, we have seen Ohio in the past. Ohio used to be the poster child for swing states. The presidential race would often come down to Ohio. All eyes would be on the state. That has not been the case since at least 2016. But that doesn't mean that it's in a state of stasis, right? Things do change and people do change their minds. And, what we're actually seeing that I think is interesting is some split in age groups here. So these youngest voters, the voters who are under the age of 30, they're actually a plurality Republican identifying. So more say that they're Republican than they do Democrat. That's pretty interesting. And that could really play into some of Ohio's politics in the future. But then when you look at voters in their 30s, it's kind of the opposite. You see way more Democrats and you see them breaking in higher numbers for Democrats. So there is a bit of a generational divide, I think, going on. And I think it will make things pretty interesting, especially when we're talking about elections that won't necessarily have as high of turnout in presidential elections. Again, I think that Ohio is still solidly Republican at the presidential level, but when we get into some of these races where we've got different personalities and we've got different issues, frankly, state-based issues and things that have just changed since the presidential election, I think that means that it can be in play.
That age trend was surprising to me as well, because usually people, younger Democrats, and as you grow up, perhaps you become more Republican. That's not really the case in Ohio because the younger voters are more conservative than the ones in their 30s. But this could come down to the issues, these races. What are those top issues for Ohioans?
Yeah, Brittany, and they're pretty familiar issues to all of us who have been watching polling over the past year or so. So the economy is the top issue, of course, with 44%. Threats to democracy in second place with 13%, and then healthcare at 11%. So we just see a little bit of changes in Ohio and between states versus Ohio versus the country overall. So there are some more localized issues here. If you add up the economy and housing here, they do form a majority, but this is a much lower majority than we've seen in states like California or New York. So I do think that these campaigns are going to have to speak to the economy and jobs in general, and as well as affordability. I don't know that the housing affordability issue, though, is so much of an issue in Ohio as it is elsewhere. I'm sure that that is the case in some of the metro areas there, but it's not really showing up as a top issue like it does in, say, California. So the candidates will have to thread that needle, I think, and really talk more about jobs and general affordability for Ohioans than housing specifically.
In 2024, Republicans were the winners when it came to affordability. In the elections that we've seen in 2025, Democrats have taken that issue. Now, when we look to 2026 and beyond, who do the voters in Ohio trust more to make their lives more affordable, Democrats or Republicans?
And overall, we find that voters trust Republicans more so than Democrats. So 43% say that they trust Republicans on the issue of affordability more. 37% say Democrats, and then 19% say neither. They don't think that they don't really trust either party on issues of affordability. If we look at independents, they are almost perfectly split between Democrats and Republicans. So there's not much daylight here as far as partisanship goes. We do see a little bit of changes in age. Some of those folks in their 30s, like we discussed earlier, they are more willing to say Democrats are hold their trust on issues of affordability. But most of the other age groups tend to side with Republicans very slightly. Again, neither party gets a majority here, so I think the issue is certainly up for grabs for both parties.
Matt, per usual, I appreciate your numbers and you coming on and breaking them down. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.